It was a cloudy Wednesday in Tampa when Pam Bondi's team opened the email. Subject line, join Ellen for a heartfelt conversation. Red, blue, and what's true. It sounded innocent, polite, almost warm, but the phrasing, what's true, felt loaded, too polished, too practiced. One of her staffers squinted at the screen. This isn't just a guest spot, it's a setup. You know how she works. Smiles on air, knives in the punchlines. Pam didn't flinch. She sat quietly, the afternoon light casting soft lines across her desk. A framed photo of her father sat next to her well-worn copy of the Florida Constitution. Her silver cross necklace shimmered faintly as she leaned forward. Good, she said. Let her smile. I'm not walking into her show for applause. I'm walking in with truth. Before diving into the story, comment where you're watching from and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the latest stories. By the time her flight landed in Los Angeles, social media was already foaming. Why would Ellen book Florida's legal firebrand? Get ready for another conservative roast session. But Pam didn't care. She'd been underestimated before. She wasn't coming to argue. She was coming to remind America that conviction doesn't need permission to speak. The morning of the taping, the Warner Brothers lot buzzed like it always did. Grips adjusting lights, interns juggling coffee trays, producers speed-walking with purpose. But inside Pam Bondi's dressing room, it was silent. No glam team, no entourage, just her. She sat near the window, sunlight creeping across the floor like it too was waiting to see what would happen. On the side table, a folded legal pad, her phone face down, and a simple black pen. No makeup brushes, no handlers, no pre-interview script. She looked into the mirror, but not to fix anything. She closed her eyes, whispered a quiet prayer, then opened them and adjusted the silver cross around her neck, just enough to make sure it would be visible, not as a message, as a reminder of who she was before the cameras and who she'd remain after. Her assistant knocked once, quietly. They're ready whenever you are. Pam gave a nod. Still no panic, no pep talk. She picked up the legal pad, glanced at a handwritten quote near the top, something her father once told her. Let the truth do the talking. Your job is to carry it, not decorate it. She folded the page, stood up, straightened her jacket, and walked out. Meanwhile, just 3 rooms down the hall, the vibe couldn't have been more different. Laughter echoed behind the Ellen Show's control room door. 2 segment writers tossed jokes back and forth like dodgeballs. You think she'll flinch when we bring up Trump? Not sure, but I've got a line about Florida and humidity that'll make her squirm. Ellen sat at her dressing table, flipping through her blue cards like a magician about to pull a trick. Her producer leaned in. Just remember, keep it light until she stiffens up. Then push. She'll either crack or freeze. Ellen smirked. It's TV. If it gets awkward, that's good for the numbers. But Pam wasn't walking into an ambush. She was walking in with a mirror and a spine built to hold it up. The jet touched down at LAX with the kind of quiet that made the noise online seem even louder. As Pam Bondi stepped off the private tarmac, 2 paparazzi lingered just past the gate, lenses already up like they knew who to expect. Click, flash. Pam, over here. Is this a redemption tour or a suicide mission? She didn't look their way. She didn't need to. Inside the black SUV, her phone lit up, not with texts, but with trends. Bondi O'Neill was already climbing. Tweets ranged from mocking to morbidly curious. Florida's finest heading into the lion's den. Hope, she packed sunscreen and shame. Incoming roast session, popcorn ready. The internet was treating her arrival like a pay-per-view showdown, but Pam scrolled through none of it. She sat back in her seat, hands folded, looking out the window, as Los Angeles blurred past like a mirage. At the studio gates, a junior assistant met her SUV with a nervous smile. Welcome, Ms. Bondi. We're really honored to have you on today. Pam nodded. I'm sure. They walked her past metal rigs, light carts, and hurried staff. The walls were covered in framed magazine covers and posters. Celebrity, smiles frozen in time. None of them looked like her. That was the point. The green room was tasteful, sterile. A platter of untouched fruit sat on the counter. A stylist, clipboard in hand, entered quickly. We've got a few outfit options if you'd like something a little lighter on camera. Softer colors, maybe ditch the cross necklace. Pam looked at her, not cruelly, just directly. I wore it on purpose. The stylist nodded awkwardly. Of course, no problem. She backed out with the kind of quiet reserved for people who realize they just stepped into something bigger than fashion. Meanwhile, just outside the door, Ellen's lead producer paced with a tablet. She's in. No entourage. She's playing the solo underdog card. Another producer chimed in. That's fine. Ellen will catch her off guard by segment 3. The room's energy crackled with the confidence of a team that had done this 100 times, but they'd never done it with Pam Bondi. In her dressing room, Pam didn't rehearse lines. She didn't flip through notes. She just watched the red light flicker on the nearby stage camera, the one pointed at the guest chair, the one that would catch every word, smirk, and silence. The assistant reappeared at the door. We're ready. In 5, Pam stood, smoothed her deep navy blouse and adjusted the cross one final time. Outside the studio, the audience was already filtering in, laughing, clapping, waiting for the next viral moment. Pam wasn't nervous. She wasn't naive. She knew what this was, not a talk show, a televised test of conviction. The lights dimmed. The theme music hit its final upbeat note, and then as the applause kicked in like clockwork, the voice everyone recognized filled the room. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Pam Bondi. Polite clapping. A few loud cheers. One or two hesitant boos, quickly swallowed by the soundboard's crowd mic mix. Pam stepped out from the side curtain. Posture perfect. Smile steady. The cross around her neck caught a glint from the spotlight and flashed like a signal. Ellen stood center stage, arms outstretched, beaming that signature smile, the one that had disarmed pop stars and presidents alike. She moved in with a casual side hug, microphone already clipped to her blazer. So, Ellen said, leading Pam toward the white guest chair, Florida's fiercest is here today. Laughter from the crowd, the kind that isn't sure if it's a compliment or an insult, but claps anyway. Pam sat, unbothered. I came here as a woman, she said calmly, not a meme. The audience paused, unsure how to take that, and that was the point. Ellen smiled wider, eyes narrowing just slightly. She leaned back in her chair like she was settling in for a chat with a best friend or a sparring match. I like that, Ellen said with a chuckle. Smart and spicy. That's what the comment section loves. Pam didn't blink. I came for conversation, not comments. A few heads turned in the audience. A subtle murmur passed like a ripple. Ellen's producers backstage exchanged glances. One tapped a finger on the segment cue card, already off script. Let's jump in, shall we? Ellen said, waving the tension away. You've been in the spotlight a lot these past few years. Some would say, controversial spotlight. What draws you into so many heated spaces? Pam nodded slightly, folding her hands. Usually, it's the truth that heats things up, not the people speaking. The crowd gave a hesitant, ooh, unsure if it was meant to sting. Ellen raised an eyebrow. But do you think maybe, just maybe, truth is subjective sometimes? Pam's smile softened, but her tone didn't. Reality might be debatable. Results aren't. When I fought for victims, for law and order, for principles, I didn't do it for applause. I did it because those things matter whether the audience likes them or not. Ellen crossed her legs and tapped her card gently. Sounds like you're saying you don't care what people think. I care deeply, Pam replied. I just don't confuse likes with legitimacy. The audience clapped, small at first, then a bit louder. Ellen shifted in her seat. You've been described as intense, unyielding, even polarizing. Pam tilted her head. Isn't that just a longer way of saying principled? Ellen smiled again, but this one didn't quite reach her eyes. Do you think there's ever a line, though? Like, maybe you cross it? Pam shrugged. If we're drawing lines between moral clarity and political comfort, I cross it proudly. That got another response from the crowd. Not applause, but silence. A pause. A moment of processing. Ellen leaned forward now, smile fading slightly. But surely you see how people watching might see you as extreme? Pam didn't break eye contact. Standing firm in a shaky world doesn't make you extreme. It makes you inconvenient. That line landed. Backstage, the control room went quiet. Someone whispered, "She's flipping them." Ellen reached for her water, took a small sip. "Okay," she said with mock playfulness. "You came prepared." Pam smiled. Not cocky, just steady. I didn't come to perform. I came to be clear. The camera slowly zoomed in. The crowd, still trying to decide if they were watching a car crash or a coronation. Ellen leaned in, voice light, almost playful, but her words were anything but. You've defended some pretty controversial people. Some would say, blindly. Doesn't that raise questions about who's really calling the shots? The crowd chuckled, not cruelly, but curiously. The bait was clear. Pam didn't blink. So we're doing labels now? She asked, voice calm. You've had guests here who defended actors, artists, and activists with actual convictions. But when I defend someone unpopular, I'm branded a puppet? Ellen tilted her head, half smiling. I think people just wonder how much of what you say is really you, and how much is just party line branding. Pam's hands stayed folded in her lap. Her voice didn't rise. Well, then let's test that, shall we? She reached down and pulled out a single printed sheet. Not dramatic, just surgical. This is from your own 2019 interview, Pam said, holding up the page. Pam Bondi's reforms around victim advocacy were long overdue and show bipartisan courage. The studio quieted. Ellen blinked. Her smile stayed frozen, just a second too long. So here's my question, Pam continued, folding the page slowly. Were you wrong then? Or are you just uncomfortable now? No applause, just silence. Ellen's audience wasn't sure whose side they were on anymore, and that was new. Ellen shifted in her seat, brushing it off with a laugh. You did your homework. No, Pam said gently. I lived it. That's the difference. A few audience members clapped, softly but genuinely. Others stayed frozen, watching a shift they couldn't unsee. Ellen tried to reroute. Okay, but look, times change, context changes, maybe people evolve, and maybe old praise doesn't apply in new climates. Pam nodded. Fair enough. Then let's evolve the conversation instead of trying to erase someone who doesn't fit your narrative. That line cracked the air like a clean strike. Ellen chuckled again, but this time it landed hollow. You're a tough cookie, Pam smiled. No tougher than the truth. Behind the scenes, one of Ellen's segment producers whispered, we need to pivot. She's controlling the pace. Pam sat still, not smug, not aggressive, just unbothered. Ellen, who usually danced circles around guests, was now grasping for rhythm, and the audience knew it. Ellen tapped her cue cards with just enough force to make the mic catch the sound. The energy had shifted. The audience could feel it. She had danced, dodged, and deflected, but now Ellen wanted control back. Okay, let's talk about something more personal, she said, voice dipped in that signature soft sarcasm. Pam raised an eyebrow slightly, waiting. Ellen leaned forward. You wear your faith, literally, around your neck. She gestured to the small silver cross resting just below Pam's collarbone. Why not in your heart instead? The crowd didn't laugh. They didn't clap. They gasped. Subtle, collective. Like everyone in the room suddenly realized they'd crossed from late-night jabs into something heavier, sacred. Pam didn't flinch. She didn't look at the audience. She didn't even touch the cross. She just looked directly at Ellen, and then said quietly but without hesitation, because I don't need to hide what anchors me. Silence. A beat too long. The kind that pulls everyone to the edge of their seats. Ellen's smile stiffened. It's just, for a lot of people, that symbol can feel exclusionary, maybe even outdated. Pam sat upright, hands still, folded. Outdated like family or outdated like truth? The producer backstage muttered. She's flipping the room again. Ellen, growing visibly uncomfortable, laughed, but it was hollow now. No, I just mean, don't you think wearing your religion so publicly turns people off, especially in today's America? Pam took a long pause, then delivered the line like a closing argument. I think people are tired of being told to be silent about what matters to them most, while the rest of the world puts chaos on loudspeaker. One woman in the second row whispered, Amen. Ellen shifted in her seat, reaching for a new angle. So you think showing your faith is brave? On daytime television? Pam didn't blink. No, I think pretending kindness and tolerance require people to hide what they believe, and that's the cowardice. Another gasp. Then, clapping, scattered, hesitant, but real. Ellen tried to regain control. Okay, but come on. People have done terrible things in the name of faith. Doesn't that make it dangerous? Pam's voice remained calm. People have done terrible things in the name of government too. Should I take off my flag next? Now the claps grew louder. Not massive, but enough to change the tone in the studio. Ellen cut in quickly. I'm just trying to say faith is personal. Maybe some people don't want it on stage. Pam finally leaned in. Not aggressively, just closer. Then maybe those people shouldn't invite me on their stage. That hit like thunder. The camera zoomed slowly on Ellen's face, eyes darting, smile cracking. She attempted one last jab, almost joking. Well, maybe if you stopped hiding behind that little cross of yours, people would take you more seriously. Theo, studio froze. Even the floor manager lowered his headset. Pam didn't move. She didn't fire back. She just sat. Then slowly, almost imperceptibly, she adjusted her necklace, not to hide it but to center it in the camera's frame, and with a steady gaze she said, "You just told the world who you are. I don't need to say another word." Dead silence, the kind that echoes, the kind that doesn't get cut in post-production. Even Ellen's biggest fans didn't know what to do with it, and for the first time, Ellen looked like the guest on her own show. The air was thick, not with outrage, but realization, the kind of heaviness that doesn't shout, it settles. Ellen had just jabbed at the cross around Pam's neck, on national television, in front of millions, and Pam, she didn't clap back, she didn't sigh, scoff, or smirk. She simply straightened the necklace with the precision of someone placing evidence on a courtroom table. The crowd sat frozen, unsure whether to laugh, gasp, or leave. Even Ellen didn't speak. Her next cue card remained untouched in her lap, fingers twitching slightly at its edge. Pam waited. Then, she slowly turned her head and looked directly into the camera. Not the host, not the audience, not the crew. You. Her eyes were clear, not angry, not teary, just unwavering, and her voice, barely above a whisper, cut sharper than any scream. When people mock belief, they're not challenging me. They're revealing themselves. No music, no laughter, just the sound of nothing. Deliberate, crushing. Cold in the control room, someone whispered, "She's not talking to the studio anymore, she's talking to the country." One crew member near stage left, young, probably mid-20s, let out a barely audible, "Wow." He didn't mean to, it just slipped. But Pam heard it. She didn't smile. She didn't react. She just let the silence breathe. The audience didn't shift in their seats. They didn't even look at Ellen. They looked at each other. And then, back at the woman now sitting stiller than anyone had all episode, Ellen cleared her throat trying to reset the rhythm. "Well," she said with a weak chuckle, "that got intense real quick." It fell flat, like a punchline missing the punch. Pam stayed looking forward, not even acknowledging the attempt to pivot. "I didn't come here for intensity," she said. "I came here because someone asked me to. But from the moment I sat in this chair, I was treated like a threat, not a guest." No one moved. "You wanted honesty? Here it is. I've been called extreme, stubborn, dangerous, just for standing by what I believe. But you want to know what's actually dangerous?" She let the question hang in the air like a hammer, then delivered the blow. "A culture that treats faith like a punchline, and conviction like a crime." The crew in the wings stopped moving. Even the light tech froze on his dimmer. The stage, usually Ellen's playground, now felt like a witness stand. And Pam? She was no longer just answering questions. She was delivering judgment. Finally, she looked back to Ellen, not to argue but to finish. "You brought me here expecting sound bites," she said. "But you forgot something." Ellen raised an eyebrow, trying to stay composed. "What's that?" Pam nodded gently toward the camera again. "That people still know truth when they hear it, and today, they did." The camera cut to commercial, but the damage was already done. Inside the studio, no one spoke. The crowd remained seated, dazed, like they had just witnessed something historic, and maybe they had. Even the applause sign operator didn't reach for the button. Pam sat quietly in her chair, hands folded. She didn't look at Ellen. She didn't look at the crew. She looked at the floor, still, calm, intentional. And then, it began. Outside the studio, the internet detonated. A 12-second TikTok clip, Pam adjusting her cross necklace, staring directly into the camera, hit the platform 38 seconds after the commercial break. Caption, "She didn't flinch. She didn't blink. She just won." Views in 10 minutes, 190K comments. This wasn't a clapback, it was a cultural warning. Within half an hour, the hashtag Pam Stood Tall trended nationally on X, formerly Twitter. People weren't quoting her words. They were posting screenshots of her expression. Still, silent, locked in. A stare that didn't ask for approval, just delivered judgment. One user posted, "That wasn't an interview, that was a reckoning." On YouTube, someone uploaded a side-by-side split screen. Left, Ellen smiling and mocking. Right, Pam staring, silent, centered. The title, "The Moment Ellen Lost Her Audience." Comments poured in. From liberals, conservatives, apolitical viewers, even atheists. "I don't even agree with her politics, but that was strength." She didn't yell. She didn't spin. She just stood there and exposed everything. Ellen looked like a host. Pam looked like a leader. Even verified users joined in. Real politics now. Pam Bondi's takedown wasn't loud, it was surgical. End faith and fire. This is what happens when calm meets condescension. At the Fox News digital desk, a producer turned from her monitor and said, "We need this clip, now." Over at CNN, an anchor whispered to her co-host during a live break, "Did you just see what happened on Ellen?" Within the hour, news alerts went live. Fox News, Pam Bondi holds her ground in viral Ellen exchange. Newsweek, Bondi's calm response goes mega viral. Pam stood tall trends. Rolling Stone, Ellen's interview format faces scrutiny after controversial. Clashing in private group chats across industries, politics, media, even entertainment. One question was repeated over and over again. Did you see what she just did? It wasn't just the cross. It wasn't just the silence. It was the refusal to play the game. Pam hadn't shouted, she hadn't stormed out, she hadn't begged for sympathy or spun for applause. She had simply sat in her conviction and let the world feel it. By that evening, Ellen's team was already in damage control mode. Producers huddled, social media managers drafted statements, sponsors began asking for call logs, and yet Pam, she wasn't refreshing her feed. She was on a quiet drive back to the hotel, looking out the window as palm trees slid past. Her assistant, Maddie, turned to her with wide eyes. "You're everywhere, like everywhere. Do you want to see it?" Pam shook her head gently. "No," she said. "Let them talk. We came to be clear, and they heard it." By the time the West Coast airing of Ellen hit the screen, the East Coast had already turned Pam Bondi into a household name again, but for entirely different reasons. She wasn't trending because of some viral meltdown. She wasn't being dragged for sound bites or spun into a meme. She was being quoted by both sides. That night, she appeared on Hannity, not for a chest-thumping, "we told you so" celebration, but for a calm, measured conversation. "I didn't go on that show to be liked," Pam said simply. "I went to be honest, even when honesty isn't fashionable." Hannity nodded, visibly impressed. Not with her politics, he already agreed, but with her discipline. The clip made the rounds immediately, but the bigger shock came the next morning. She showed up on CNN, not a re-air, live, opposite a skeptical host who had been openly critical of her in the past. "I didn't agree with what you said," the anchor admitted, "but I've got to be real with you. The way you handled that? Respect." Pam nodded, not triumphant, just present. Truth doesn't always land where people expect it, but it still lands. That line hit like scripture on Twitter. We didn't agree with her, but we respect her spine. The real twist came when The View reached out, a seat at the table. Producers framed it as a dialogue, but everyone knew what it was, a ratings grab. Still, Pam showed up. Same navy blouse, same silver cross, no makeup team, no ego. And this time, the audience wasn't just listening, they were nodding. Even Joy Behar, who rarely missed a chance to go for the jugular, paused after Pam answered a question on free speech and said, "You know, I don't agree with you, but I have to say you're consistent, and that's rare." Pam smiled softly. Consistency isn't hard when you're not pretending. A single line, no sarcasm, no performance, just steel delivered softly. And in the following days, her Ellen appearance was replayed on Sunday morning political panels. Professors used her moment in media ethics lectures. Youth groups and churches discussed her calm under fire. A New York Times op-ed read, "Pam Bondi didn't just survive Ellen, she reframed the rules of political media." In private, D.C. circles, even moderate Democrats began whispering, "She didn't spin, she stood still," and it worked. Pam had become more than a guest. She had become a reference point, a touchstone, someone who reminded the nation not just what to say but how to stand when saying it. The backlash didn't start with headlines. It started in kitchens, in car rides, in Sunday sermons and late-night scrolls. People weren't screaming. They were stunned, not because they agreed with everything Pam Bondi said, many didn't, but because they recognized the look on Ellen's face the moment she mocked the cross, and they didn't like it. By Monday morning, thousands of emails had landed in Warner Brothers' inbox, not from activists or lobbyists, but from regular Americans. Teachers, veterans, mothers, store clerks in Missouri and mechanics in West Virginia. "I've watched Ellen for years, but faith isn't a joke. Mocking someone's beliefs on live TV, that's not kindness, that's cruelty." She didn't clap back. She stood tall, and you tried to humiliate her for it. Hashtags flipped like dominoes. What started as viral fandom now turned into a cultural gut check. Pam stood tall was joined by "Darn Ellen crossed." The line, "Gar mocked Wonlin," trended in small-town Facebook groups, then on national Twitter threads, even left-leaning. Audiences tweeted, "You don't have to agree with someone's values to respect their right to hold them." Then came the sponsors. A major home goods brand pulled a pre-scheduled ad campaign. A national retail chain requested to pause all live integrations. Internally, Warner Brothers staff were briefed on a possible audience drop-off in the Midwest market. One executive reportedly said, "We underestimated how deeply that moment would cut." And then came the late-night comics. The same shows that usually cheered Ellen on started hesitating. Jimmy Fallon opened with a soft jab. "Maybe we've reached the point where not everything needs to be a punchline." Trevor Noah was even more direct. Watching that clip back, I didn't see a conservative getting owned. I saw someone being baited for believing in something. That's not funny. That's cheap. On social media, younger influencers joined in, not for clout, but because something about the whole exchange felt off. "I'm not religious," one TikToker said in a stitched video that went viral, "but I know bullying when I see it." And Pam didn't swing once, that's strength. And while Ellen stayed silent, Pam didn't gloat. She didn't tour the talk shows bragging. She didn't tweet. She released one statement, just one line. "We're allowed to disagree, but if we have to mock faith to feel powerful, maybe we've already lost the argument." The culture shifted, just slightly, but enough to feel it. Enough for people to say, that wasn't about politics anymore, that was about respect. And in studios across Hollywood, the same ones that laughed easily before, producers began whispering a new kind of question. What if we're the ones out of touch? 1 week after the Ellen interview aired, the lights rose in a packed auditorium in Dallas. The American Women of Principle Conference, a national gathering that had once drawn a modest few thousand, now held over 20,000 attendees. The air buzzed with anticipation, not for a concert, not for a politician, for Pam. No one needed to say her last name anymore, just Pam was enough. A new generation of women, mothers, students, teachers, small business owners, had flown in from every corner of the country, not for slogans, not for selfies, but for substance. She was scheduled as a keynote, but she didn't enter like a celebrity. No light show, no music, just a quiet walk to center stage, the mic waiting, and before she even said a word, the crowd stood, thunderous, full, lasting. It wasn't just applause, it was recognition. Pam looked out at the sea of faces. Some had tears already forming. Others just stared with fierce attention, holding on to every breath. She waited, let the room settle. Then she spoke. Some people said I went too far. Others said I didn't go far enough. She paused, looking out, again. But I didn't show up on that stage to win a fight. I showed up to remind America that your faith, your values, your identity do not belong to punchlines. The crowd erupted, but Pam raised a hand, gently, not to silence but to steady. That moment on Ellen, that wasn't about me. That was about all of you. Her voice didn't waver. It didn't spike. It simply stood. Teachers who pray before the school bell rings, but feel like they have to hide it. Veterans who are mocked for their patriotism. Mothers who are told their beliefs are outdated. She leaned forward slightly, speaking into the silence that now filled the room like breath. We weren't silent. We were silenced. And now, we're done apologizing. There were tears. There was thunderous applause. But more than anything, there was unity. In the crowd, a teenage girl clutched a small notebook with PB scribbled on the front. A woman in her 60s wore a necklace that matched Pam's. Two friends from opposite political sides stood shoulder to shoulder, both nodding. Pam didn't ask them to agree on everything. She asked them to remember that conviction was not a costume. It was a calling. Her speech was clipped into 1,000 TikToks, Instagram Reels, and YouTube Shorts, but none of them captured the stillness, the power of the live silence between her words. Media outlets dubbed it the post-Ellen surge, Pam's second act, Faith's quiet comeback. But Pam didn't care about branding. She didn't hire a PR team. She didn't run for anything. She just kept showing up, on panels, in churches, on campuses, not shouting, not selling, just speaking. That night in Dallas, as the lights dimmed and the crowd filed out, someone asked her, "Should we call this a win?" Pam looked at the stage behind her, then shook her head. "No," she said. "Call it a beginning." The house was quiet, no lights on but the one above the kitchen sink casting soft shadows across the counter. Pam set her purse down slowly, unclipped her heels, walked barefoot across the hardwood floor like she was still carrying the weight of every word she didn't say on that stage. She didn't turn on the TV, Didn't check her phone. The noise could wait. Tonight was about silence. She reached for the small stack of letters Maddie had left on the counter, hand-sorted from the thousands they'd received that week. Most were thank you notes. Some were prayers. A few were long testimonies. But one envelope was different. Handwritten. No return address. Just the initials MR in the corner. She opened it carefully like it might break in her hands. Inside, the note read, "I wore my cross under my blouse until I saw you. I used to think hiding made me polite. Now I realize it just made me afraid. Thank you for standing so that some of us could start." Pam stared at the page, then smiled, barely. The kind of smile that doesn't stretch your lips, but slows your breathing. She folded the letter gently and placed it beside the coffee maker. Then she walked toward the hallway mirror, the one across from her father's old bookshelf, and paused. She adjusted her necklace, centered it, not for fashion, for faith, and then, almost like instinct, she turned toward the living room, toward the still-mounted camera Maddie had forgotten to pack up from a previous live stream. The little red standby light blinked softly. Pam stepped forward, turned it on, and spoke, not to the followers, not to the noise, not even to the critics, but to the next woman who might be watching from a corner of the country where silence felt safer than truth. "If they fear your truth," she said, "it's because they know it's stronger than their script." She didn't blink. She didn't smile. She didn't explain. She just let the silence sit, a silence full of every woman who'd felt mocked for being principled, of every man who had bowed his head quietly at work and wondered if he'd just committed career suicide, of every teenager who'd tucked their values beneath sarcasm just to blend in. And then the screen went dark. No outro music, no applause, just blackness, and the feeling that something real had been said and couldn't be unsaid.